Hey everybody, welcome back to another great video on the fundamentals of instruction. Who knew it would be this fun? I'm trying to make it as good as possible for you. Today we're back with the next installment of the fundamentals of instruction, and today we're going to be talking about instructor responsibilities and professionalism. And to me, this is one of the most important ones. And why is that? Well, because this particular task is a required item that's going to be asked on the check ride. So of all the FOIs that you have to know, all the fundamentals of instruction that you have to know, this you have to know more than the rest of them. So without delay, let's make sure that we keep clicking along and we'll get started. Here we go. So today we're going to be talking about the, like I said, the instructor responsibilities and professionalism. And the very first thing we want to do is we want to break down this presentation into two specific parts. We're going to be talking about two specific types of instructors. One of them is the aviation instructor that is not a flight instructor, and then the flight instructor. So anybody who can teach in aviation is called an aviation instructor. Doesn't matter what you're trying to teach. If you're trying to teach mechanics, it doesn't matter what it is. Ground, flight, they're all aviation instructors. So our first group of responsibilities are going to be just for those group of people. In addition to those responsibilities, flight instructors have even more responsibilities, and that's the second group that we're going to talk about. Hopefully that makes sense to you. So of a regular aviation instructor, so this classifies broad classification for anybody in aviation teaches this thing, they have a couple of responsibilities. And what is that responsibilities? Well, it's HIMPS is our acronym, and let's go over each one of these and make sure we completely understand this. Our first responsibility is the H in HIMPS, and which is to help students learn. It's your responsibility as an aviation instructor to help students learn. And that's like the basic core thing behind a teacher, right? Absolutely, we want to make sure that we're helping somebody learn and that we're teaching them. And it should be an enjoyable experience. You should have fun while you're learning. You should, your instructor should make the experience fun for you. It's not just a bunch of lecturing and making it an unenjoyable experience. So how do we do that? Well, find a way to continue to motivate that person, and the experience will be more pleasurable. So find that higher level of motivation, continue to motivate that student, and that's where you want to be going in that direction to reach that level of enjoyable experience. The more you motivate them, the more of an enjoyable experience it's going to be. The next thing we'll talk about that is how do we do that? Well, probably one of the most top ways we can do that is to work with our clients and help them with setting a set of standards they can work to. And if you develop your lesson plans, every single lesson plan has a standard to it, and if you help them to achieve those standards, you will help them be motivated, and it will be an enjoyable experience. So setting the standards or the next one. Why? Well, why should you set standards? Everybody wants to feel capable that they can do something. That's why there's people out there that spend money to learn how to do something from people who know how to do it. And sometimes it's not a price factor. I charge a pretty good amount of money for my flight instruction and for ground instruction independently. I do that for two different reasons. I do it once. One reason is to weed out anybody who's not very serious about flight training. And two is I don't want people to waste my time, and I think I'm worth it. I think I'm worth what I charge per hour. I charge over $100 an hour. And people, when I tell them what I charge, sometimes they freak out. But that's fine. What I can tell you is this, is that in order for me to do the best possible job that you can do, that I can do for you, I have to learn my trade. And I am not going to work for anything less than the guy who fixes my weed eater. Let's make perfectly clear on that. And that is how this guy can make a pleasurable experience for you, because if I know what I'm getting paid and I know how to do my job, then it makes it easier for me to make it a pleasurable and an enjoyable experience. But it doesn't mean you make it easy for your client. Doesn't mean that you make it easy for your client. And I think that if you have the lesson plans and you know the objectives and the student knows the objectives, this is incredibly easy to do. So helping students learn, that's our first one. Number 2, emphasize the positive. This is your E in HEMPS, HEMPSS. Your conduct and the way you present yourself will greatly influence your students' perception of aviation. If you are a professional person, your student will be a professional person. If you are a lazy person, your student will be lazy. If you take risk, they'll take risk. If you do high speed, low approaches, they'll do high speed. If you fly underneath the bridge, they'll fly underneath the bridge. So you are on the front line, monkey see, monkey do kind of thing. So when you're emphasizing the positive about this industry, they will mimic you. They will see that there's a positive side in things. And with that, if we're trying to emphasize the positive, what's the backside of that? Well, you stay away from the negative. I have friends of mine that every time a new report comes out for an airplane crash, he wants to know if I've read it. And I'm like, no, I don't want to read it. He goes, well, don't you train all your students? I'm like, no, I do not. I do not want a brand spanking new student, come every single day. Hey, did you see there was this instructor and the student got killed? No. You have to learn how to emphasize the positive. Could you use that situation to emphasize the positive? You probably could. Just leave out all the gore and just say there was an accident with an instructor and a student. But what I want you to take away from this is that, apparently, I don't want to say apparently, but there might have been a situation in which they weren't working together as a crew effectively, and the instructor might not have been qualified on the airplane, or whatever the situation is. But try to find a silver lining on the cloud is what I'm trying to tell you. Don't tell somebody how dangerous it is to fly at night. It's not dangerous to fly at night. You just got to change your mindset of flying at night. Some routes are safer than others at night. But to have that negative self-concept, that will definitely inhibit the perceptual process, because the person's not going to want to see it, because they're going to perceive that it's actually unsafe because they heard you say that. That's part of those perception things. Remember that we talked about this in Chapter 1. In Area of Operation 1, Task A, Human Behavior and Effective Communication. Wow, I'm really talking fast today. Remember, we talked about this in Area of Operation 1, Task A, Human Behavior and Effective Communication. And we said specifically on that first or second note of that was that fear is going to have a great effect on these perceptions. So keep that silver lining coming, and we'll have that enjoyable experience as well. Minimize student frustrations. There's a lot of different ways we can minimize student frustrations. We're about to put an acronym within inside of an acronym. So we have HEMPS, and we are on the M, and we're going to talk about some ways to motivate students. The bottom line is, folks, as probably well as I do, pilots do not want to be a student. Pilots just want to fly, man, because it's like the best thing ever. It's like, oh my God, I get to fly today? You got to be joking me. This is so cool. And you get out there and you're in the airplane. What a wonderful thing to be able to do. But how do you keep them motivated? How do you see that proverbial light at the end of the tunnel? How do you do that? How do you get it where they can see that there's an end in sight? Well, there's a way to do it, and it's called a Mac bag. Mac bag. So the first one, motivate your students. How are we going to be motivating our students? So many different ways to motivate our students. I've got like all these key times. Like if I'm working with a primary student, all these primary things that I do for them that they've never seen before. Like for instance, when they solo, you've got to cut their shirt. You've got to mark it up with, you got to put it out there in the school and let everybody sign it. Get them motivated to do it. Take a picture, do that social media post, have a little party, do them a little plaque. There's all kind of things you can do. You know, if you're a member of the National Association of Flight Instructors, you can actually have access to solo certificates. You can just go in there and drop in the person's name, and you put it out on a color printer, and you can put it in a cheap little $3 frame from Walmart, and boom, you just added motivation. When they finish their private pilot certificate, have them sign up on a wings account and give them credit for the wings flight, and they can get their little bronze lapel wings. Everybody likes to have those little tiny wings. There's all different kind of ways. That's just on the primary how I try to keep them motivated, but there's just tons of different ways to do that. The A in MAC bag is approach students as individuals. No two students are going to learn alike. You got to treat everybody as an individual. Criticize constructively. I can't stress this enough. When you're criticizing someone, when you're giving critique, you have to do it and be constructive. We talked about that last lesson, about how the arts of the critique. You want to make sure you criticize constructively. That's one of the things that we actually talked about on that. Keep students informed. Students want to know where they are. They want to know how much further they have. Now, younger students, not as much as the adult learner. The adult learner wants to know things. One guy told me one time, and if I mess this up, I apologize, but he says, I wouldn't mind being in a dark room as long as you gave me a good idea about where the light switch is. And I was like, okay, I guess I can follow that. And if I didn't make that analogy correct, somebody post that down below. I don't know if that's the correct analogy, but it made me feel good about what I was teaching, because I use that analogy a pretty good bit now. In regard, when someone doesn't understand what I'm trying to say, I'm like, well, if I gave you a good idea about where the light switch is, would you mind being in a dark room? And at least you know there's light there if you need it. Be consistent. This is a huge one, folks. I've seen instructors across the board that are just terrible. They come in one day and they're like Jekyll and Hyde. It's unbelievable. You can't be like that. The students hate that. They're coming in. They want to have fun. This is fun stuff. Be fun. And be consistent with the being fun. Admit error. This is a hard one. This is a very hard one. A lot of people don't want to admit error. You know, if you're wrong or something, nobody wants to admit when they're wrong. But I want to tell you, first off, try not to be wrong a lot. And then second off, if you're going to be wrong, just say you're wrong. It ain't no big deal. And people will respect you a lot more than trying to hide it. Okay? Give credit when credit is due. If somebody does good, tell them they do good. Everybody likes a little pat on the back every now and then. And these are all great ways that we can minimize those student frustrations as they're going through training. And so if you start practicing this, I think you'll see that your students' frustrations will be minimized as well. Let's go back to the HIMPS acronym and pick up where there. We're now on the P. Provide adequate instruction. Provide adequate instruction is what it says in this book here. Provide adequate instruction. This book's the Aviation Instructors Handbook, by the way. Adequate. It doesn't say good. It doesn't say fair. It doesn't say outstanding. It says adequate. You know, imagine if people answered that in life like that. Like if your wife says, "Hey, how you like being married to me?" And you go, "No, it's adequate." Yeah, I don't know. The word adequate, you know, it's like the FAA's way of just being comical, I guess. But yeah, they say make sure you provide adequate instruction. So what's adequate to you? What do you think is adequate? I think safe is adequate. I think that if you had a genuine interest in the well-being of each student, that providing adequate instruction would just come normal. So you want them to be safe. You want them to do it right. You want to make sure that they're not going to struggle with things in life. You're not teaching them just to pass the check ride. Adequate instruction. Again, no two students are alike. So what is good for Johnny, what is adequate for Johnny may not be adequate for Sandy. Standards of performance. What are our standards of performance in aviation? Yep, that is correct. The practical test standards and the airman certification standards. Those are all of the standards that we have. And if you'll notice in the CFI PTS, there is no standards. There are no standards in the CFI PTS because it tells you to go into the respective ACS to find out what the standards are. So, but when you first start out training with a student, what are the standards? Are you trying to tell somebody in when they first start that they have to hit very accurate on a landing point, or they have to maintain a specific altitude? No. Please don't do that. Standards are like this when you first start, and then they progressively get lower and lower and lower and lower and tighter and tighter and tighter as you progress. But like if someone's just starting off on lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3, what would be my standards of performance for taxiing? Keep it on the pavement. Don't go in the grass. That's a good standard of performance. Hopefully you wouldn't let them go off the pavement. But you get what I'm saying, right? You wouldn't hold someone to standard by saying, okay, you got to stay within this distance of the center line on the nose wheel. A lot of light twins, you can look at a little mirror off your side and see where the nose wheel is while you're taxiing. And I've had in students or applicants on CFI check rides tell me when I was an examiner, I'd say, "Do you think I'm taxiing adequate?" And they're like, "No, you're not really." I'm like, "This is my first time now." Like, "No, you're really not doing. You're about that far off the center line." I'm like, "Man, those are really tight standards for a lesson 1. What about in flight? What should my standards be?" And people say plus or minus this or whatever. And I'm like, "No. Second lesson, third lesson, keep it in the middle of the sky. Don't go to the edge of the sky. If you go to the edge of the sky, it's bad. That's a failure for the lesson. So don't do that." So your standards of performance are everything, and you have to have the standards, but not when you first start off. Eventually, you have to start making these standards get progressively more narrow. And the regulations are set out there to make sure we have these standards. So the regulations in the respective reg, like 61.107, the respective letter that you would have for the aircraft that you're flying, single engine, multi-engine, helicopter, glider, whatever you're flying, that is exactly the same exact layout as the ACS. So everything you see in like 61.107 Bravo 1 would be all single engine. Bravo 2 is all multi-engine. Or, I'm sorry, 61.107 Alpha is single engine and Bravo is multi-engine. So if you look at everything in 107 Alpha, that's everything in the single engine ACS. If you look at anything in 61.127 Alpha, that's the commercial ACS. So the regs give way to these standards of performance, and the standards define them. Just remember that these standards that you're looking at, they are just a assessing tool. They're not a teaching tool. You can't teach directly from it. So make sure you understand that. Our S is safety, ensuring aviation safety. This is still following along with the acronym HIMPS. So ensuring aviation safety. You are on the front line. You are an ambassador of the industry for safety. Everything you do is around safety. Remember how we talked about provided when we first started talking about this lesson, we talked about emphasizing the positive. Well, emphasizing the positive, I gave you a good idea about doing safe things. Well, here's where we're really talking about doing the safe thing. Students will mimic you. That is ensuring the positive. With the safety thing, you want to make sure that what you're doing, even if it's a positive or non-positive thing, is safe. So, is it a positive thing to say, or is it a non-positive thing to say flying at night is dangerous? Yes. But are you ensuring aviation safety if you plan your night cross country over a road? or an interstate? Yes. So you're more safe of a route to plan over a interstate than you would be to not plan over a road. So ensuring aviation safety is everything. You have to think about safety, safety, safety all the time. And any safety practices that you put on a student are going to have a very long-lasting impression on your student, because that's what they know. First things learned, best remembered. What law is that? Primacy. Outstanding. Good job. So advocate for safety. These things mean very little to a student if you don't do them consistently. Just to let you know that. Now, in addition to these, we have even more responsibilities for the flight instructor. So all that stuff we just named, plus this new list here, which is called PPAS, or PPAPS, however you want to arrange the letters, it doesn't matter with me. And you can look in your book, you can find these. And so what is the first one we want to look at? Well, the first piece we're going to look at is called pilot supervision. Well, what do we mean when we say pilot supervision? Well, it means that the flight instructor has a responsibility to supervise the pilot, to look at them and make sure they're doing the correct thing, that they're doing safe. These things are very, very, very important. And when you feel like you need more supervision of some than others, these are key signs that someone's maybe ready or not ready to solo. And key signs they may be ready or not ready to go on a cross country or to go for their check ride. And so it's very, very important that you supervise them throughout their training and ensure that they're on the right path. The second one is evaluation of student pilot ability. And we talked about this when we talked about our assessment and critique. So how do you evaluate the student pilot's ability? Well, you can use all the different tools we used in assessment and critique to evaluate them, but you know when someone's doing the right thing. And some of these are common sense. But the only way for us to really evaluate a student's ability is to compare it to what we're looking to see them do. So before check ride, what is our official tool for evaluating a student's ability? And that's the PTS or the ACS. But what if it's not before the check ride? What if it's prior to solo? How do we evaluate our student pilot ability then? Well, if a student pilot can go from startup to shutdown and you don't have to say anything in the airplane, well, that's pretty good. So it's up to you as instructor to evaluate your student's pilot ability adequately, because there's really nothing out there that tells you per se what you must look at unless you buy a commercially produced something. And that's not what this course is about. It's about you making the correct decision to ensure that you are teaching correctly and showing them what to do correctly. Endorsements for flight instruction. Unlike other instructors, you can give flight instruction. And so anything flight associated with, you can give endorsements for, like an endorsement for a tail dragger, an endorsement for a complex, an endorsement for high performance, or an endorsement for a check ride. That's your responsibility to do that as an instructor. Practical test recommendations. So not only are we talking about an endorsement, we're talking about making a recommendation to someone. And we make a recommendation through application. And so how do we make the recommendation through application? IACRA 8710 applications paper. Okay, that's how we do that. Additional training and endorsements. So after they get their pilot certificate, anything they want to do after that is your responsibility to deal with. Pilot proficiencies, doing flight reviews, doing IPCs if applicable for your CFI rating. See and avoid responsibility. Absolutely 100%. I can't stress this enough. When you are in the airplane, you should make it very vigilant that they never have their head inside for any length of time. We have so many things inside these new airplanes nowadays. G500s, G1000s. Everybody's looking at all this fancy stuff. They got their iPad in there. I call it that the heads down display. Everybody's looking inside the airplane. They should not be looking inside the airplane that much. They should be looking outside, because that is where the dangerous stuff is. Okay? So you must be able to see and avoid traffic, see and avoid obstacles, see and avoid terrain. Very, very, very important. Again, we're talking about some of the evaluation of the student pilot ability, which is that pre-solo flight thought process. And I told you, if a person can go from startup to shutdown and you don't have to say anything, that person's ready to solo that airplane. But what else? Is it just the flight portion? Nope. It has to do with their ability to do all of the paperwork required as well. You remember, we can't go flying until the amount of the paperwork equals the takeoff weight of the aircraft. So there's a lot of paperwork has to be done, a lot of things, weight and balance, the airworthiness. So there's a lot of things that go into this pre-solo thought process. And you want to make sure the student has a very, very keen grip on that. What are some other flight instructor responsibilities? Well, one of them is physiological obstacles. What kind of physiological obstacles are we talking about? Well, you may have like noises that students are not familiar with, like a warning horn. You may have vibrations that students are not familiar with, G-forces that students are not familiar with. And if you see these for the very first time, the student may freak out. How many of you remember when you first felt the G-force from a steep turn or something like that? How did you feel? I remember how I felt, and it was very uncomfortable because it wasn't a good steep turn that I got showed the very first time. And there was a lot of load factor involved, and I didn't like that feeling of getting pushed down in the seat like that. I remember all different type of things that I saw for the very first time that freaked me out. When I first did a stall and I heard a stall warning horn for the very first time, I had no idea what it meant. I looked around for other things in the airplane. I didn't know, what it was. I was just looking around inside the airplane trying to figure out where this buzzer was coming from because the instructor didn't tell me it was coming. But probably one of the things that you have to worry about most off is a sick student, and physiological obstacles for sick students. And if you ever have a sick student while you're flying, this is an incredibly easy fix. Do not open up the window and have air go on them or trying to look out at a distance or try to fly the airplane or anything else. Once motion sickness starts, motion sickness will go on until the motion stops. So a sick student will absolutely positively will not learn anything or will not learn well. So go to the nearest airport, stop the airplane, have them get out, walk around, have them puke or whatever they have to do. And then when they're ready, put them back in the airplane and fly them directly back to their home airport. Don't have that student puke in the plane. That is embarrassing for a new student. No student likes to get out of the airplane and have vomit on their shirt or vomit in the airplane or vomit in a bag. They don't need that. You're demotivating them when you allow that to happen. So if you're guilty of that, you need to stop doing that. I know a lot of instructors, they like it. They're like, I made them puke. And I'm like, no. Like I do a lot of spin training. And I'm like, no, we don't want to get a sick student, a sick CFI applicant, being sick while going through spin training. They're not going to learn anything. Like, man, haven't you learned anything from the FOIs? We don't want to be like grateful that they puked or like it's a badge of honor or something, because it's not. So cover those physiological obstacles with your student. Make sure they don't have any issues with that. Ensuring the student ability skill set. Ensuring their ability. How can you ensure their ability to do something? Well, we have those skills that's required prior to solo flight. We know what they are. In our regulations, it tells us exactly what those skills are that they should have. If you're flying a single-engine airplane, it's 6187D. If you're flying a multi-engine airplane solo, it's 6187E. And so I just look in D, and I cover all the facts, and those are all the things required for me to solo. And I also have the items required for the ground portion, which is in 6187B, and that's your pre-solo written. So if I have these particular skills and they can go from start to shutdown and I don't have to say anything, they're ready to solo. Good deal. But I think one of the biggest things is when you're not in the airplane with them, if they have a hiccup or they have a question, who are they going to call? You? No. They shouldn't call you. You shouldn't be talking to someone on a handheld radio. It's okay for you to monitor with a handheld radio, but do not be coaching and giving advice on a handheld radio while your student's soloing. That is incredibly dangerous. And the reason for is, one, you shouldn't have to coach them. If you've done your job, you don't need to coach them. They should be ready to solo because we said start up, shut down. You don't say anything, they're good to go. So why should you be coaching them with a handheld radio in the pattern? All right, so now let's go off my soapbox there and let's come back to the point. So what if they do get something they don't understand? Do they have any resources? Well, yeah, if they're at a control towered field, they definitely do. That's ATC, and you want to teach them how ATC is their friend and they can work with ATC if need be. How do you do that? Take them to the control tower before they solo. Probably like on the morning before their solo or the morning of their solo or the day before their solo, and introduce them. Hey, what's up, tower folks? This is little Johnny. He's going to be soloing tomorrow, and he just want to come up here and say hey and let you hear his voice so you can recognize him on the radio, and he'll be in November 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and he's probably going to solo around 9 o'clock. Who's working tomorrow morning? Yeah, good. Okay, good. Well, thank you very much for handling my client good, and not giving him any weird crap while he's in the traffic pattern tomorrow. Also, we want to make sure that we look at other things like special emphasis areas. Now, special emphasis areas are kind of lost within the new Airman Certification Standards, but they're not within the PTS. You can find them in the front of the PTS. They're called special emphasis areas. Take a look at that when you have time. They don't put those in the ACS anymore because they integrate them into risk management, but they do have it in the PTS still, and you should definitely need to go and look at each one of those things. If you have one of my course manuals, you can actually see there's a specific chapter in there right on the special emphasis areas and gives you a kind of a short spiel on each one to go through and make sure that you understand it. So one of the other things is professionalism. The instructor must always be exhibiting professionalism. And of course, that's the second half of this chapter here. Instructor responsibilities and professionalism. So what do we mean by professionalism? Well, we have this nice acronym here, SAD-PP. SAD-PP. And let's look at SAD-PP and see what they want. Let's see what this acronym is telling us. Well, the first one is sincerity. So being honest, straightforward, admit mistakes, finding answers to questions when you don't know, all those are signs of sincerity to the student that you honestly, genuinely care about where they're going in their program. So make sure you have sincerity. Acceptance of the students. No two students learn alike. You're both working to the same goal. Try to make sure that you accept the student for where they are in their training program and who they are as an individual. Demeanor. Positive attitude. Respect the student. Be consistent. Be kind. They're paying your paycheck, people. They're paying your paycheck. You are not above and beyond them. You're providing a service, and you need to make sure you have that proper demeanor. Personal appearance and habits. For big ab initio schools, this is actually quite funny. When a person first becomes a CFI, they're all professional, nice, dressed nice, and their hair's combed and they're shaved. And then it's like 6 months later when they reach that first burnout. Oh my God, they look terrible. They look like a hobo. They look like they took their clothes out of their back pocket on the way into the office. I mean, it's terrible looking. Now, there are some that manage to stay with it, but in general, it degresses as you go through the months until they get their time and get out of the flight school. But look professional. Get that personal appearance and habits. Don't have any non-societal smells. I'm not sure the proper way to put that. Hey, don't stink. Brush your teeth. Use deodorant. Don't use too much perfume, and don't use too much cologne, guys and girls. I have flown with girls who smelled really good, but they choked me out. And I have flown with guys who had nice smelling cologne, but they choked me out. And I have flown with people who had bad breath. And I've flown with people who had clearly body odor. But you can address these things pretty easily as long as the very first time you lay eyes on your student, you say, hey, now, let's get some personal things going. Let's get some rules established between us. Our faces are going to be about this far apart from one another, maybe a little bit closer. I would prefer not to smell what you had for breakfast or lunch or whatnot. And I would appreciate if you use deodorant, because it's going to be 117 degrees here in Phoenix, Arizona, or wherever you're training. Doesn't really matter. Make those things evident. Last one is proper language. I told you earlier, this is one thing I suffered with for a long time, because I felt that my one-on-one instruction that I was doing with people, and I would use very colorful teaching words, I felt like that was me, my style. And then as I got more professional and started to understand how society works a little bit more, I'm like, well, maybe this is not the best. Maybe this is not the best thing. And I had a couple of people complain, and that I got woke on that. It opened my eyes, and I was able to see how unprofessional that was. So do yourself a favor. If profanity is part of your vocabulary, don't bring it into the classroom. You can talk without using profanity. Speak positively, speak descriptively, and no profanity. We talked a little bit earlier about how we evaluate a student's ability, and this is part of our professionalism. A true professional will learn to evaluate someone in a timely fashion and with a little stress on the student. So we evaluate based off demonstrated performance. So we ask someone, hey, can you do this? And they say yes, and they do it. Or we say, hey, can you say this? And they say it, and that's fine. And so that's how one of the ways we can demonstrate is that one way we can prove that student ability is just through demonstration. So a way that we can prove a student's ability is by them having to demonstrate it to us. And this is going to consider your mastery of the elements. Mastery of the elements. So if you open up your PTS or ACS and you open up to any variable operation, you look at any one of those items in the task, those are called elements. And so if I read off any one of those, you should be able to tell me what that means. That's called mastery of the elements. So we're more worried about the mastery of the elements than we are worried about the overall performance. As I could go into mega detail now, I'm going to wait till the maneuvers portion of the training here, but I could go into mega detail about how people do maneuvers that are just flat out wrong. Flat out wrong. But people swear that this is the correct way, and the only backup they have is because this is the way I was taught. And I'm like, well, you've never looked at the airplane flying handbook, because clearly this is not the way this maneuver is done. Okay. So we talked earlier about the student's ability, and I think you're going to have a mega increase in ability if you always do, like we said earlier, keep the student informed. Students love to be kept informed. They want to know their progress. They want to know where they are. Criticize oftenly, and that criticism should be written for the person to be able to utilize that when they're on their own. Very important. To address any deficiencies and suggest a corrective action. Don't just say something and not follow up with it. Those are all good signs or good ways you could do that. So what if a student makes an error when they're trying to demonstrate their ability to do something? So you've asked a student to do something to demonstrate their ability. What if they make errors? Well, how many of you have ever had a grabberton flight instructor? You make the slightest mistake and they grab a hold of the controls. No. It's best to let a student get partially into a mistake and then have them see if they can get their way out of it. If you're always grabbing it, you're never giving them a chance to learn. So remember that when you're correcting students' errors, first off, bring it to their attention. Allow them the benefit of the doubt to correct it. If they don't, then you could correct it, but don't grab the controls. Just say, okay, this is what you need to do, or come on the controls with them and help them out of the maneuver. And then once they get recovered, then ask them to do the same maneuver again and see if they make the same mistake again. Okay. Like I said, it's just so hard. it's so hard to teach somebody something if you never give them a chance to fix what they made a mistake in. So what are some of your other responsibilities? Well, as a flight instructor, you can also, as well as other instructors, you can also sign someone off for a knowledge test. And that's what we call the written exam, the written test. And so you can also sign someone off for a knowledge test. This is in accordance with 61.35. And 61.35 of the Federal Aviation Regulations state that you must have an endorsement from an instructor to take the test. Test, whenever you get it, give that test to them. If they do not make 100, you are responsible for the deficiencies on that test. And you have to go over the stuff and make it up with them. And if they don't pass the test, then you have to give them a 6149 endorsement, which is a retesting after failure. And that's good for a knowledge test as well as a practical test. And that's very important that you go over those PLT codes with them. I call one of the endorsements that we have in the industry, it's the 6139A6 III, and that is the endorsement that you have in your logbook, and every one of you have it that's listening to this video. It's the endorsement that the instructor gives when you didn't make 100 and have to go over the PLT codes with you. I call it the biggest lie in aviation because no instructor does it. And it's okay, so I'm not going to say no instructor does it. It's very rare that instructors will go over that PLT code. Why? Because they don't know how to do it. They get some generic code and they have no idea where they're going to go with it, so they just don't do it. They just give you the endorsement. When I was examining, I punked instructors out about that stuff. I would say, did you put this in here? Yeah. Did you do this? And I would look at the student and look over the instructor. Because I'd already asked the student, did they go over the PLT codes, and the student says no. And I'm like, why'd you write this lie in here? I can't stand it. It doesn't take but just a couple minutes. The good thing about it is, or the highly professional thing about it would be that if you actually did your job as an instructor and gave the proper ground instruction and led them through how to study for a written test, they wouldn't need it. Because you'd probably only have 2 or 3 or 4 PLT codes to go over instead of 30 PLTs to go over. And you wouldn't have to be false about making that statement because you wouldn't have a lot of work to do. You'd just have to go 1 or 2 or 3 PLT codes because they only missed a couple. If a student of mine wants to take a knowledge test, they better come to me with a couple of hundreds because I will not give them an endorsement to take the test if they don't show me a couple of hundreds. I do not accept anything less than 95. That's embarrassing. You should be embarrassed. If you're letting your students come to you with anything less than a 95, that's embarrassing. Because I'm telling you, examiners will gauge a person solely off of a written test score. And especially on this exam, examiners really will gauge you off a written test score. So if you made very low on your written test scores, you can make amends. Just remember, you can go back and actually take a FOI or a FIA test again and up that score. You don't have to go in there with 70s and 80s because the examiner will draw a conclusion on you. Will perceive that you're weak in your ground and they'll just drill you harder. I know examiners that don't do it, and I know a lot of examiners, a majority of examiners do. So, but not all of them, but a majority. So if you don't have that score of 100 on your student's test, you do have to give them the 6139 A6 III, biggest line aviation endorsement. And you're also required to maintain a record of this too. So you're required to keep a record of a couple of things. We're not going to talk about that. We'll talk about that in the regulatory guidance. But this is one of the things as an instructor you have to keep a record of. So you need to put in your record the name, the date, the type of test, and the results. And the result would just be pass, fail. You don't have to put a numeric thing attached to it. You don't have to do that. So in regards to the knowledge test, what about practical tests? Well, we got the same exact obligation there for a practical test. When you endorse someone for a practical test, you are stating that that person will pass that test. So endorsing someone before they're ready is a breach of faith between you and your client. Can't do that. You got to make sure you stay focused and stay on track, and you keep that person going for success. Keep them motivated, keep them pushing forward, and motivate them for success, pushing for success. And you don't want to lay out these these false perceptions that they're doing correctly, and then get in the check ride and then have to take the check ride a couple of times, what do you think the student would think of you at that time? They're going to lose all faith in you, especially when the examiner starts cutting you down inside the check ride by saying things like, your instructor should have covered this. And you're like, they never even said that. She never even said that. Well, that's wrong. You shouldn't do that. If your student fails on a check ride, you're responsible, not your student. You're the one that didn't cover the information correctly with them. Now, I admit now, there are students who do some absolute crazy crap, like taxiing over a whole short line at a controlled towered field and then failing over that. That is pretty dead-gum stupid right there. But then again, there's some people that just can't handle the stress and they just do silly things. But you should hold yourself responsible for any time that a student is failing on a test. I don't like the word failure. I like notice of disapproval. Failure just sounds so harsh. It's just terrible, like you're tearing them down. And you're also required to keep a record of this endorsement: name, date, type of test, and the results, and just put pass, fail. You don't have to put anything else. And the knowledge test endorsements and these endorsements here for the practical test, you got to keep them for 3 years. After that, you can burn them. Or if you feel froggy, you can keep them. Whatever works, it doesn't matter. So we've talked about how instructor responsibilities and professionalism leading up to the exam and while you're working. What do you do after? How do you keep the momentum going after you pass this check ride and go out and start working in the industry? Well, here's a couple of things I want to suggest to you that you do. One is, I want you to become a very big advocate and participate in, and have your students participate in, the only industry recognized proficiency program, which is the FAA's WINGS program, Pilot Proficiency Awards program, in accordance with 61.56, and there's also an advisory circular for it. I want you to get very, very familiar with this, and if you're an independent flight instructor, you can definitely use the WINGS program to not only stay proficient and help your clients stay proficient, but you can also renew your CFI by participating in the WINGS, by signing people off for WINGS stuff. That does not appear in the regulations. That is in a document called FSIMS, F-S-I-M-S. It's the 8900.1 guidance for aviation safety inspectors. And that's one of the hidden ways that you can actually renew your CFI by doing, I think it's 20 different, signing off on 20 different WINGS flights will renew your CFI. But get in touch with the WINGS, embrace it, and participate in it, and that will definitely help you to that professionalism that you need to maintain. Aviation Safety Foundation, part of AOPA, participate with them, watch their videos, online training modules, participate with them. College degree programs. I always recommend people try to do something with aviation, even if it's just taking an aviation course online, like one per semester. But do something. Keep yourself going forward. Remember, college courses, college credits are good for 10 years. So you're going to take 10 years to get your bachelor's if you'd like, because that's how long it takes for a college course to expire once you earn it. And by the way, if you're already a CFI, you're working on your CFI, just remember every bit of the stuff that you're doing right now. Your private, your instrument, or private flight, private ground, instrument flight, instrument ground, commercial flight, commercial ground, CFI, II, MEI, those all count college credits. So if you go to an aviation-based school, they'll take your pilot certificate and your flight certificate and convert all that to college credit. It ends up being like 25 or 30 college hours. It's like a large amount to do that. And then you only have to have maybe 12 months or so to actually get a bachelor's degree. It's insane how quick you can do it. So look into that. If you have any questions, post them down below. I'll answer questions about that too. Type clubs. I like type clubs. Type clubs are say, for instance, if you're flying a Beechcraft model, say if you're doing like a beach bonanza, well, there's the Bonanza Society. If you're flying a Cirrus, you have the Cirrus Owner and Pilots Association, COPA. If you're flying the Baby Beach line, you have the Beach Aero Club that specializes in the sports, and the Sundowners and Sierra line. All different type clubs for the different type of airplanes you'll be flying. And these are great things, and you can do fly-ins and fly-outs and go to their events, and you go to Oshkosh or something, they're guaranteed to have a booth there, or Sun and Fun. What a great thing where you can learn more about the aviation, learn more about your airplane, and learn more about your industry by participating in type clubs. Keeping up on all the FAA publications and material, this can be a cumbersome job. Why? Because most of you have ForeFlight or some type of electronic medium, and you pick up a paper chart and you're just like, duh, because you ain't looked at paper probably ever, or it's been a long time since you looked at paper, and you end up some stump the chump question. Somebody finds some symbol that's new in the industry, and it happens to me all the time. Somebody says, what does this mean? I've never seen it before in my natural life. And so you need to stay up on all the publications and the basic core things, and not just centralize around an iPad program. Okay. Lastly would be participating in notice for proposed rulemakings. I love this one. So the NPRMs, or notice for proposed rulemakings, are on the FAA's website, and you can go on there and read what they plan on changing, and you comment on them. Now, why would you do that? Well, one, you're standing up with the industry, and two, you're making your voice heard, which is very important. But the really cool thing about everything in this list that I just gave you, including the NPRM, they're all resume items. So if you're trying to build a powerful resume, these are all powerful resume items. And these things, what people like to see on resumes. It's not just a resume that has flight time and your qualifications. A lot of people just think flight time and what kind of certificate you have is the only thing you really need to get the job. Not necessarily true. Not necessarily true. So that's pretty much it for this. This concludes my lesson for today. This is called Instructor Responsibility and Professionalism. So as an instructor, if I learn what my responsibilities are, it can help me guide myself through my career, and I will make a strong pact with myself to make sure the professionalism rings through with me no matter what I do in the field. Let me look over my lesson plan, make sure I discussed everything. And do you have any questions, Mr. Examiner? So hopefully you've got something out of this program here, and you'll be able to see this is a required task. I would definitely spend some time talking about this one, as you did. As you see here, me talking about this is very close to, I'm saying it's probably going to be around 50 minutes after I finish editing, a little bit over 15 minutes. And I'm giving a lot of stories and a lot of analogies and whatnot going through. So I definitely think that you're capable of doing the same thing. You just simply have to practice. So put this on your phone, put it on your Bluetooth riding down the road, listen to it, put it in your ear pods while you're sitting, or your earbuds as you're sitting out by the pool sunbathing. You can do this. I know you can do this. And as always, I thank you so much for being a patron of mine and for participating on my YouTube channel as well as my Patreon channel as well. We're going to finish up with the FOIs this week. We only have 2 more things after this, which is teaching, ways to teach in the plane, and risk management. Those will all be posted before the end of the weekend. And then Monday starts regulations. And oh boy, are you going to have fun there, because that is my most favorite. I'm not joking. It really is. I really do love regs, and you'll see on Monday why I absolutely love them, because I just love talking about them. Everybody tries to make it hard and hard to understand. I'm telling you, it's not. You simply just got to find an instructor that knows it well enough to discuss it with you. I'm Todd Shellnutt with CFI Pro, and I'll see you around. Bye-bye.